The rain fell in sheets across the city streets, turning the morning commute into a frantic ballet of umbrellas and hurried steps. Maya Martinez clutched her worn portfolio to her chest, trying to shield the precious documents from the downpour as she navigated through the crowd. Today was supposed to be the day that changed everything. Her interview at Preston Marketing Group, an opportunity that had taken months to secure. "Excuse me, sorry," she called out, dodging pedestrians as she checked her watch. 20 minutes until her interview. The bus had broken down 3 blocks back, leaving her to sprint the remaining distance in her only pair of professional heels. At 25, Maya's life resembled a precarious house of cards. Student loans loomed over her like storm clouds, her bank account perpetually hovered near zero, and her resume was a patchwork of part-time jobs and internships. Still, she maintained a determined optimism that had carried her through 4 years of night classes and countless rejection letters. "Just one break," she whispered to herself, reciting her morning mantra. "That's all I need." As she rounded the corner, the wind caught her umbrella, flipping it inside out with a violent snap. Maya cursed under her breath, abandoning the useless shield in a nearby trash can as the rain soaked through her carefully selected blazer. 17 minutes remained. She could still make it. That's when she saw the elderly woman struggling with her grocery bags at the bus stop, paper sacks disintegrating in the downpour as canned goods and produce tumbled onto the wet sidewalk. The woman knelt slowly, her weathered hands trembling as she tried to gather her belongings, seemingly invisible to the hurried pedestrians streaming around her. Maya froze mid-step. The Preston building stood just 2 blocks ahead, its glass exterior gleaming even in the grey morning light. She checked her watch again. 15 minutes. She looked back at the elderly woman, now on her knees as an apple rolled into a puddle. Maya closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and turned around. "Let me help you with that," Maya said, kneeling beside the woman and retrieving the soaked apple. "Oh, thank you, dear," the woman replied, her voice soft but clear. "These old hands don't work as well in the cold." Up close, Maya could see the woman was perhaps in her late 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a simple bun. Despite the rain, she was impeccably put together in a modest coat and practical shoes, her dignity intact even as her groceries lay scattered. "I've got it, don't worry," Maya said, quickly gathering the items and placing them in her own tote bag, which was thankfully waterproof. "Do you live nearby?" "Just 3 blocks that way," the woman said, pointing with a slightly trembling hand. "Eleanor Winters. I'm terribly sorry to trouble you." "Maya Martinez." "And it's no trouble at all," Maya replied, though her eyes darted to her watch reflexively. 12 minutes remained. Even if she ran, she'd arrive soaking wet and flustered, hardly the professional impression she'd hoped to make. As they walked to Eleanor's apartment building, the older woman moved slowly but deliberately, her posture proud despite her apparent fragility. She spoke of the neighborhood, how it had changed over the 40 years she'd lived there, her voice carrying a warmth that belied the chilly morning. "My son always tells me to have groceries delivered, but I prefer to select my own produce," Eleanor explained. "Silly, perhaps, but these little routines keep me independent." Maya nodded, thinking of her own mother back in Arizona, equally stubborn about maintaining her self-sufficiency. By the time they reached Eleanor's building, a modest but well-maintained walk-up, Maya had missed her interview by 7 minutes. "Would you like to come up for tea? You're soaked through," Eleanor offered as they reached her door. Maya was tempted by the kindness but shook her head. "I actually had a job interview this morning, so I should probably call them and see if I can reschedule." Eleanor's face fell. "Oh, my dear, you missed an interview to help me. I'm so terribly sorry." "Please don't worry about it," Maya assured her, setting the groceries on a small table in the hallway. "There will be other opportunities. Besides, those cans of soup were pretty heavy." Eleanor laughed, a light, musical sound that made her face transform. "Well, at the very least, let me give you my phone number. Perhaps you could stop by sometime, and I could repay your kindness with a proper meal." They exchanged information, Eleanor writing her number in a precise, elegant script on the back of a receipt. As Maya finally stepped back into the rain, considerably later and wetter than she'd planned to be, she felt a curious lightness despite her circumstances. Her call to Preston Marketing went straight to voicemail, and the email she sent apologizing and requesting another chance went unanswered for days. Yet somehow, she couldn't bring herself to regret her choice. A month passed in a blur of job applications, shift work, and penny pinching. Maya's roommate Rachel watched with concern as Maya juggled waitressing at a local diner in the mornings, tutoring college students in the afternoons, and taking online classes in the evenings. "You're going to burn out," Rachel warned one evening, finding Maya asleep at their tiny kitchen table, her laptop still open to a half-completed assignment. "No job is worth this." "It's not forever," Maya insisted, rubbing her eyes. "Just until something more stable comes along." What she didn't say was how the constant rejection was wearing her down. Each polite email "we've decided to pursue other candidates" chipped away at her confidence. Her student loan payments had been deferred twice already, and her credit card balance grew each month despite her frugality. One Saturday afternoon, seeking a moment of peace, Maya wandered to the small park near her apartment. The spring day had drawn people outdoors, families spreading picnic blankets on the patchy grass, children chasing each other around the worn playground equipment. She found an empty bench and closed her eyes, letting the sunshine warm her face. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one with financial security, career satisfaction, perhaps even enough savings for occasional travel. The fantasy was so absorbing that she didn't notice someone approach until the bench creaked with additional weight. "Maya, is that you?" She opened her eyes to find Eleanor Winters smiling at her, a paperback novel in her hands and a small bag at her feet. "Miss Winters. How are you?" Maya straightened, genuinely pleased to see the older woman looking well. "Eleanor, please." "And I'm quite well, thank you. I often come here to read when the weather permits." She studied Maya's face with surprising perception. "You look tired, my dear." Something about Eleanor's gentle concern broke through Maya's practiced optimism. "It's been a challenging few weeks," she admitted. "Still no luck on the job front." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes life's greatest opportunities arrive through unexpected doors." She patted Maya's hand. "Would you perhaps have time for that cup of tea I offered? My apartment is just around the corner." Maya found herself accepting without hesitation. Eleanor's apartment was exactly as one might expect, modest but immaculate, filled with books and simple furniture that spoke of comfort rather than style. Family photos populated the shelves, though Maya noticed they were mostly of the same person throughout different life stages, a boy growing into a man with Eleanor's same thoughtful eyes. "My son," Eleanor explained, following Maya's gaze as she set down a tray with tea and simple cookies. "Alexander. He works in business, travels constantly. Too busy for regular visits, but he calls when he can." The wistfulness in her voice was unmistakable, and Maya felt a pang of sympathy. Her own family was far away, but they spoke almost daily. She couldn't imagine the loneliness of Eleanor's life. "He looks kind," Maya offered, studying a photo of a serious-looking man in his 40s, his resemblance to Eleanor evident in the shape of his eyes and mouth. Eleanor's face softened. "He is, just very focused on his work." She poured tea into delicate cups that looked like family heirlooms. "Now, tell me about these jobs you're seeking. What is it you really want to do?" That first visit stretched to 2 hours, Maya finding herself sharing her dreams of working in digital marketing, combining creativity with analytics in ways that her business degree had only begun to explore. Eleanor listened with genuine interest, asking insightful questions that revealed a sharp mind behind her grandmotherly exterior. As Maya prepared to leave, Eleanor pressed the remainder of the cookies into her hands. "Come back next Saturday if you'd like. I make a decent soup, and I always make too much for just myself." A routine developed naturally. Saturday afternoons became reserved for Eleanor, their conversations flowing easily between Maya's job search, Eleanor's neighborhood observations, and occasionally deeper topics of hopes and regrets. Maya began noticing small ways to help, changing a difficult-to-reach light bulb, carrying in groceries when they ran into each other at the local market, fixing Eleanor's temperamental television set. Eleanor never mentioned needing help, and Maya never framed her assistance as charity. It was simply what friends did for each other. "You've become quite attached to your elderly friend," Rachel remarked one evening as Maya prepared a small container of homemade brownies to take to Eleanor. "It's sweet, but don't you think you should be focusing on networking with people who could actually help your career?" Maya carefully wrapped the brownies, considering her response. "Eleanor gives me perspective. When I'm with her, My problems don't seem so overwhelming, she shrugged. Besides, not everything has to be strategic. Sometimes it's nice to just be kind without expecting anything in return. Rachel rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Always the optimist. That's why I keep you around, balances out my cynicism. Over the next few months, Maya learned more about Eleanor's life in fragments shared over tea and homemade meals. She'd been a teacher for 40 years, specializing in literature at a local high school. She'd been widowed young, raising her son alone while juggling her career. She loved mystery novels, classical music, and had an unexpected passion for baseball that had Maya securing last-minute nosebleed tickets for a game that left Eleanor beaming for days afterward. What Eleanor didn't share were details about her son beyond vague references. Maya gathered he was successful but extremely private, a trait Eleanor seemed to share despite her warmth. She never complained about his absences, though Maya sometimes caught her gazing at his photos with a mixture of pride and longing. For Maya, the friendship provided an anchor during continued professional disappointments. A promising interview led nowhere. A temporary office position ended after just 3 weeks when the company downsized. Her tutoring clients dwindled as the semester ended. Through it all, Eleanor offered not pity but steady encouragement, occasionally editing Maya's cover letters with the precision of the English teacher she'd once been. "Your generation faces challenges we couldn't have imagined," she remarked once. "But you also have opportunities we never dreamed of. The right door will open, Maya. You just need to be ready when it does." In turn, Maya found herself bringing small joys into Eleanor's routine: fresh flowers from the discount section of the grocery store, interesting articles she'd printed from online sources since Eleanor didn't own a computer. Occasionally accompanying her to doctor's appointments when her arthritis flared up. "You know," Eleanor said one afternoon as Maya fixed a leaky faucet in her bathroom, "I've lived in this building for decades, and you're the first real friend I've made here in years." Maya smiled, tightening the wrench. "Their loss. You're pretty great company." "My son worries about me being alone," Eleanor continued, handing Maya a towel as water splashed. "He wants me to move to one of those retirement communities with activities and staff. Very expensive, very elegant." "And you don't want to?" Eleanor's expression turned stubborn. "I value my independence, and I've never been one for luxury. Alexander doesn't understand that I'm perfectly content with my simple life." Maya nodded, understanding instinctively. Her own parents often worried about her living in the city, suggesting safer and, in their minds, better alternatives back home. "Sometimes the people who love us most understand you," at least she offered. Eleanor's eyes crinkled. "Precisely, my dear. Precisely." Summer faded into fall, and with the changing season came a cascade of crises that tested Maya's resilience to its limits. First came the notice her apartment building had been sold to developers planning to convert the units to luxury condominiums. All tenants had 60 days to vacate. "This can't be legal," Rachel fumed, pacing their small living room. "They can't just throw us out." But the fine print of their month-to-month lease offered little protection, and their limited budget made finding new accommodations in the increasingly expensive neighborhood seem impossible. A week later, the diner where Maya had steadily worked morning shifts announced its closure, another victim of rising rents and changing neighborhood demographics. Her final paycheck would come just days before she needed to move. That evening, Maya sat at her kitchen table surrounded by apartment listings far beyond her price range, calculator in hand, as she tried to stretch numbers that refused to cooperate. Her phone pinged with a message from her mother. "Maybe it's time to come home for a while, Mija. Your old room is waiting. No shame in regrouping." The message, though kindly meant, struck Maya like a physical blow. Going home felt like admitting defeat, surrendering the independence she'd fought so hard to maintain. Yet as she stared at her dwindling bank balance, practical considerations began to overshadow pride. The following Saturday, she arrived at Eleanor's apartment earlier than usual, her usual cheerfulness harder to maintain. Eleanor took one look at her face and immediately put on the kettle. "Tell me everything," she said simply, guiding Maya to the comfortable armchair by the window. The story spilled out in a rush: the eviction, the job loss, the looming decision about moving back to her parents' home and abandoning the life she'd built. "I'd have to leave my online program," she concluded, her voice catching. "Start over somewhere else. And I'd have to leave." She gestured helplessly around Eleanor's apartment, unable to articulate how much their friendship had come to mean to her. Eleanor listened without interruption, her expression grave. When Maya finally fell silent, she reached across and took her hand. "I'm so very sorry, my dear. Life can be terribly unfair, especially to those working hardest to improve their circumstances." "I've been trying so hard," Maya whispered, embarrassed by the tears that threatened. "But nothing I do seems to be enough." "You've been extraordinarily kind to me these past months," Eleanor said quietly, "without expecting anything in return. That speaks to your character, which is worth far more than any professional achievement." They sat in silence for a moment, the afternoon light catching the dust motes in Eleanor's modest living room. Finally, Eleanor spoke again, her voice hesitant. "I don't have much in the way of resources, but I do have a small spare room. It's hardly ideal, just a converted office, really, but if you needed a temporary solution." Maya looked up in surprise. "Eleanor, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't impose on you like that." "It wouldn't be an imposition." In fact, Eleanor seemed to struggle with her words, unusual for someone normally so articulate. "In fact, having you here would be a comfort to me as well. I find myself worrying more about being alone these days." There was something in Eleanor's tone that gave Maya pause. Looking more closely, she noticed subtle changes she'd somehow missed during their regular visits. Eleanor seemed thinner, more fragile, with a pallor beneath her usually healthy complexion. "Are you feeling all right?" Maya asked, concern displacing her own troubles. Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Just the usual complaints of age. Nothing to trouble yourself about," but she didn't quite meet Maya's eyes, and her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her teacup. Maya felt a chill of premonition. "Have you told your son?" "About not feeling well?" "Alexander has enough to worry about," Eleanor replied, her tone closing the subject. "Now, shall we discuss more pleasant matters? I found a book one think you might enjoy." Maya allowed the conversation to shift, but made a mental note to pay closer attention to Eleanor's health. The offer of the spare room lingered between them, unaccepted but not forgotten. When she left that evening, Eleanor seemed more tired than usual, her goodbye hug a little tighter, a little longer. Neither of them could have predicted how their circumstances would change within the week. Wednesday evening, Maya's phone rang as she sorted through belongings, deciding what to keep and what to donate before her impending move. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen. "Hello," she answered cheerfully. The only response was labored breathing and a confused murmur. "Eleanor, are you okay?" Maya's grip tightened on the phone. "I don't feel quite right." Eleanor's voice came finally, faint and slurred. "I'm sorry to bother you." "I'm coming over right now," Maya said firmly, already searching for her shoes. "Stay on the phone with me." She kept talking as she ran the 6 blocks to Eleanor's building, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The door was unlocked, and she found Eleanor slumped in her armchair, phone still clutched in her hand, her face alarmingly grey. I need to go to the hospital," Eleanor managed, her normally precise speech fragmented. Maya called an ambulance, then sat beside Eleanor, holding her hand and monitoring her pulse as they waited. Everything happened in a blur after that, the paramedics arriving, the rushed journey to the hospital, Eleanor being wheeled away as Maya provided what limited information she knew about her friend's medical history. "Are you family?" a nurse asked in the waiting room. "No, just a friend," Maya admitted, hating how the word just diminished what Eleanor meant to her. "But I don't think there's any family nearby. Her son travels a lot for work." "We'll need to contact next of kin," the nurse explained. "Do you know how to reach him?" Maya realized with a jolt that despite months of friendship, she had no idea how to contact Eleanor's son. She hadn't even caught his last name, assuming it was Winters like his mother. "I can check her phone," she offered. "She had it with her when I found her." The nurse returned with Eleanor's belongings, and Maya carefully searched through the contacts on her simple flip phone. Under Alexander was a number with a star beside it, clearly important. With trembling fingers, Maya pressed call. A deep voice answered almost immediately. "Mother, is everything all right? You usually don't call this late." "This isn't Eleanor," Maya explained quickly. "My name is Maya Martinez. I'm a friend of your mother's. She's had some kind of medical emergency. We're at Metro General Hospital." There was a sharp intake of breath. "Then I'll be there as soon as possible." Tell them, his voice faltered. Tell them Alexander Reynolds is coming. Maya froze, the phone nearly slipping from her fingers. Alexander Reynolds. The name echoed in her mind, instantly recognizable. Founder and CEO of Reynolds Innovations, the technology company whose revolutionary products had transformed multiple industries. But his face regularly appeared in business magazines and news segments about the country's most influential entrepreneurs. Eleanor's son was not just successful, he was a billionaire, one of the wealthiest people in the country. Maya sat heavily in the waiting room chair, struggling to reconcile this information with the modest elderly woman who lived in a simple 2-bedroom apartment, who carefully clipped coupons and waited for items to go on sale before purchasing them. 3 hours later, commotion erupted at the hospital entrance. Maya looked up to see a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit striding purposefully toward the reception desk, flanked by what appeared to be security personnel. His face was instantly recognizable from the photos in Eleanor's apartment, the same thoughtful eyes, now tight with worry. Alexander Reynolds, he announced to the startled receptionist. I'm here for Eleanor Winters, my mother. The contrast between his commanding presence and the soft-spoken woman Maya knew was jarring. As staff scrambled to direct him, his gaze swept the waiting room and locked on Maya, who had risen uncertainly to her feet. Are you Maya? He asked, his voice slightly gentler as he approached her. She nodded, suddenly conscious of her worn jeans and faded t-shirt in the face of his obvious wealth and power. Eleanor is stable, she explained quickly. They think it was a minor stroke. The doctor can explain more. Alexander studied her face with an intensity that reminded her of Eleanor's perceptiveness. You're the one who found her. Yes, we have tea together on Saturdays, but she called me tonight, and something seemed wrong. His expression shifted, confusion replacing concern for a moment. Tea on Saturdays? You're friends with my mother? How did you meet? Before Maya could answer, a doctor approached to discuss Eleanor's condition, and Alexander was whisked away, leaving Maya with more questions than answers. She remained in the waiting room, uncertain of her place in this unfolding drama, but unwilling to abandon Eleanor. An hour later, Alexander returned, his commanding presence somewhat diminished by evident exhaustion. He sat beside Maya, loosening his tie. She's going to recover, he said without preamble. It was a mild stroke, caught early enough to prevent significant damage. Thanks to you, he turned to face her directly. The doctor said if she'd been alone much longer, the outcome could have been very different. Relief flooded through Maya. Can I see her? She's resting now, Alexander replied. But she was asking for you, he studied Maya with renewed intensity. Which is surprising, because in all our conversations, she's never once mentioned having a close friend named Maya. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty at midnight, harsh fluorescent lights reflecting off vacant tables. Maya sat across from Alexander Reynolds, cradling a cup of mediocre coffee, still trying to reconcile the man before her with what she knew of Eleanor's life. So Alexander began, his voice carefully neutral. You met my mother when she dropped her groceries. Maya nodded, recounting their first meeting and the friendship that had developed over the past months. Alexander listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly complex. And you've been helping her fixing things in her apartment, accompanying her to appointments, bringing her books and flowers, expecting nothing in return. There was a note of disbelief in his question. Maya felt a flicker of defensiveness. That's what friends do for each other. Eleanor has been just as supportive of me, emotionally if not practically. Alexander leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that suddenly reminded Maya strongly of Eleanor. You had no idea who I was, who she was. She introduced herself as Eleanor Winters. She mentioned her son worked in business and traveled frequently. That's all I knew. Maya hesitated, then added, Your last name isn't Winters. Reynolds. My father's name. She went back to her maiden name after he died. Alexander's gaze was evaluating, as if recalculating a complex equation. So you genuinely befriended my mother without any knowledge of her connection to me or my company. The implication stung. I befriended Eleanor because she's kind, intelligent, and wonderful company. I don't care who her son is or what he does. To her surprise, Alexander's stern expression softened into something like relief. I apologize. That came out wrong, he sighed deeply. You have to understand, people have tried to use my mother to get to me before. It's why she's so private about our relationship. But she lives so Maya struggled to find a tactful way to phrase her confusion. Modestly, Alexander supplied. That's entirely her choice. Believe me, I've offered her every comfort money can buy. She refuses almost all of it. He smiled faintly, looking down at his coffee. My mother was a literature teacher for 40 years. She and my father lived frugally, valuing education and experiences over material possessions. When my company took off, I wanted to give her everything: a mansion, staff, travel, luxury. She accepted exactly one gift, but a monthly deposit into her account that she mostly gives away to former students in need and charities she believes in. Maya thought of Eleanor's meticulous budgeting, her carefully maintained but aging possessions. She never mentioned any of that. She wouldn't, Alexander said with a hint of frustration. My mother believes wealth changes how people see you, rarely for the better. She values authentic connections, people who appreciate her for herself. His gaze returned to Maya, softening. People like you, apparently. The final pieces clicked into place. That's why she was so insistent about her independence. When you suggested assisted living. The finest senior community in the country, Alexander confirmed, with gourmet meals, cultural programs, medical staff on site. She called it a gilded cage and refused to even visit. His expression grew troubled. But after tonight, I'm not sure how much longer she can safely live alone. Maya hesitated, then shared her own recent challenges: the impending homelessness, the job loss, Eleanor's offer of her spare room. I didn't accept because I didn't want to impose, but maybe. Alexander's eyes widened with sudden understanding. A mutually beneficial arrangement. You'd have a place to stay, and my mother would have someone nearby if she needed help. It would be temporary, Maya emphasized, just until I find steady work and can afford my own place again. What field are you looking in? Alexander asked, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. Digital marketing. I have a business degree and I've been taking additional courses in analytics and content strategy. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. Reynolds Innovations has a substantial marketing department. Before Maya could respond, he held up a hand. I'm not offering you a job because you helped my mother. That would be unprofessional and unfair to qualified candidates who've gone through proper channels. I wouldn't want that anyway, Maya said firmly. However, he continued, I can ensure your resume receives appropriate consideration if you're genuinely qualified. The rest would be up to you. He smiled slightly. My mother has excellent judgment of character. If she values your friendship, I suspect you have qualities our company looks for. Maya felt lightheaded, the surreal conversation taking yet another unexpected turn. That's very generous. Not at all. It's practical. Alexander checked his watch. They'll let us see her soon. Before we do, I want to thank you properly. Whatever happens next, you saved my mother's life tonight. I'm in your debt. Maya shook her head. There's no debt. I care about Eleanor. Anyone who knows her would have done the same. Alexander's expression suggested that wasn't necessarily true, but he merely nodded. Well then, shall we go see if she's awake? I imagine she has some explaining to do to both of us. Eleanor's recovery progressed steadily over the following week. The stroke had been relatively minor, caught early enough that with proper therapy and medication, her doctors predicted a near-complete recovery. Maya visited daily, often finding Alexander already there, his commanding presence softened in his mother's company. On the day before Eleanor's discharge, Maya arrived to find mother and son in the midst of what appeared to be a long-standing discussion. Perfectly reasonable compromise, Alexander was saying, his tone suggesting this wasn't the first time he'd made his argument. Eleanor noticed Maya in the doorway and brightened. Maya, perfect timing. Perhaps you can help resolve our impasse. She gestured to the chair beside her bed. My son believes I can no longer live independently. I maintain that with some modest accommodations, I can continue quite capably. Alexander sighed, the sound of a man well accustomed to his mother's stubbornness. The doctor recommends having someone nearby, at least during recovery. Which is why Eleanor continued smoothly, I was hoping Maya might reconsider my offer of the spare room, if she's still in need of accommodation. Maya glanced between them, sensing the weight of unspoken context. You're sure I wouldn't be intruding? Quite the opposite, Eleanor assured her. You'd be doing me a tremendous favor while solving your own housing dilemma. A truly equitable arrangement. Alexander watched the exchange with a thoughtful expression. It would ease my concerns considerably, he admitted, though I'd insist on having some modifications made to the apartment. Safety features, at minimum. Eleanor rolled her eyes good-naturedly. If you must, though nothing ostentatious, please. I won't have the neighbors gossiping. The matter was settled with surprising ease. By the time Eleanor was discharged, her apartment had received subtle but significant upgrades: grab bars in the bathroom, improved lighting, a state-of-the-art medical alert system disguised as elegant wall fixtures. Maya moved her belongings into the small spare room the same day, relieved to have a solution to her housing crisis but determined that the arrangement would be temporary. I've applied for an entry-level position at Reynolds Innovations, she told Eleanor one evening as they shared a simple dinner. Your son said my resume received fair consideration, but nothing more. Eleanor nodded approvingly. As it should be. Alexander understands the value of earning one's place, she studied Maya over her reading glasses. Are you nervous? Terrified, Maya admitted with a small laugh. It's a highly competitive position, but the interview experience alone will be valuable. The interview process was indeed rigorous: 3 rounds with increasingly senior team members, a practical assessment of her skills, detailed discussions of case studies and potential strategies. Throughout, Maya was acutely aware of maintaining her professional demeanor, never once mentioning her connection to the CEO's mother. 2 weeks later, an email arrived with an offer for an associate marketing strategist position, entry level, but with clear advancement potential, and a salary that brought tears to Maya's eyes when she saw the figure. I got it, she told Eleanor that evening, still dazed. On my own merits. The hiring manager specifically mentioned my analytical approach and creative problem solving. Eleanor's embrace was fierce for someone still regaining her strength. Of course you did. Your talents were always evident to those paying attention. The following months brought adjustments for both women. Maya began her new position, throwing herself into the work with characteristic determination. Eleanor focused on her recovery, grudgingly,